It's a long time ago. I'll give you the update. Okay. So if you remember, where we are in 1 Samuel is that Saul has become king and very quickly disappoints. He is, the words I think we used a couple of weeks ago are he is rash and he is not trusting. And so what he quickly finds himself doing is getting direction from a man that he very clearly honors in Samuel, but doesn't want to patiently wait for the things that Samuel's encouraging him for. And we see regularly his rashness spill out. And we're going to continue seeing that throughout the book of 1 Samuel. Even when David becomes king, we will watch this character trait of Saul, this rashness, spill out in his life. But most recently, he is attacking the Philistines. After Jonathan really did his own attack of the Philistines, then Saul gets everybody together. And what he did, actually, we're going to read that now. Okay, but they rout the Philistines, and everything's in good order, okay? But Jonathan is really the reason why this happened. And so we played off the contrast, the comparison and contrast of those two men, Saul and his son Jonathan. Saul is rash. He seems to have a considerable failure over and over again, even though God still seems to come and help him in times of need. Jonathan, though, seems to be right-minded. He seems to have more courage, and he seems to be able to accomplish the task. And so now we pick up there in verse 14. Now the men of Israel were in distress that day because Saul had bound the people under an oath, saying, "Cursed be any man who eats before evening comes, before I have avenged myself on my enemies." So none of the troops tasted food. The entire army entered the woods, and there was honey on the ground. And when they went into the woods, they saw the honey oozing out. Yet no one put his hand to his mouth because they feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard that his father had bound the people with the oath. So he reached out the end of the staff that was in his hand and dipped it into the honeycomb. He raised his hand to his mouth, and his eyes brightened. Then one of the soldiers told him, "Your father bound the army under a strict oath, saying, 'Cursed be any man who eats food today.' That is why the men are faint." And Jonathan said, "My father has made trouble for the country. See how my eyes brightened when I tasted a little of this honey? How much better it would have been if the men had eaten today some of the plunder they took from their enemies. Would not the slaughter of the Philistines have been even greater?" That day, after the Israelites had struck down the Philistines from Michmash to Aijalon, they were exhausted. They pounced on the plunder, and taking sheep, cattle, and calves, they butchered them on the ground and ate them, together with the blood. Then someone said to Saul, "Look, the men are sinning against the Lord by eating meat that has blood in it." "You have broken faith," he said. "Roll a large stone over here at once." Then he said, "Go out among the men and tell them, 'Each of you bring me your cattle and sheep and slaughter from here and eat them. Do not sin against the Lord by eating meat with blood still in it.'" So everyone brought his ox that night and slaughtered it there. Then Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first time he had done this. Saul said, "Let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them till dawn, and let us not leave one of them alive." "Do whatever seems best to you," they replied. But the priest said, "Let us inquire of God here." So Saul asked God, "Shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into Israel's hand?" But God did not answer him that day. I'm just going to do one more through verse 39. Saul therefore said, "Come here, all of you who are leaders of the army, and let us find out what sin has been committed today. As surely as the Lord who rescues Israel lives, even if it lies with my son Jonathan, he must die. But not one of the men said a word. Okay, what is that? Was a long section there. What is it that you're observing in this text? Jonathan is what? Jonathan is rash? Saul is very rash. Okay, yes. Tell me why you say that. Okay. Right. Yeah. He seems to be out of control here. And my question of observation about this is, why is he wanting to make this oath? That's the big question. Why in the world does he think this oath would be so important? So that's going to be one of the things we deal with. Okay, what else are you guys noticing? Stephanie? Okay, say a little bit more about what's confusing to you. Okay. Okay, if I could condense what you're saying is, this is really dramatic, like an overdone soap opera, and it can create a little bit of confusion. Is that an accurate statement? Yes. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of people involved. Right? Yeah. Okay. What else are you guys noticing? David?
The men are so hungry that they eat the meat.
Okay.
Draining the blood.
Okay. So they defeat the Philistines and they take the plunder, and they're so hungry that they just start eating the meat with the blood still in it. And so that's a problem, and we can go back into the different Old Testament texts to see that, but it becomes an issue. Yeah, they're so starving. Mark? That's a good question. We will get to that when we interpret, but he's asking the question, if you couldn't hear Mark, does that mean they're eating raw meat? Okay. What else are you guys finding here, observing? Yeah. We'll get to the meat here in a second. Yeah. What else in the story? Don't miss some of the just basic observations. David?
It says Saul made an altar.
Yes.
Saul made an altar. Not before there's any discussion of a priest.
Okay. You're noticing that Saul makes the altar, and we don't even find out there's a priest until verse, 36? Yeah. Okay, so you're just noticing Saul makes the altar, and there's not even a mention of the priest. Yeah.
I want to back up a little bit. Jonathan actually calls out his dad and tells him that he made a mistake. Or he's telling his deal, hey, my dad made a mistake.
Yes.
Wouldn't it have been better?
Right.
So he's kind of calling him out on that.
Yeah, so if you couldn't hear Keith, he's just noticing that Jonathan actually is criticizing his dad for the decision to keep everybody from eating food. And he's even noticing, his language that he's using, didn't you see how my eyes were brightened? And actually that's a repeat. It's repetition from the way the author writes this. He eats the honey and his eyes are brightened. So I really appreciate that language because it makes me understand what's going on. I mean, I've been there before. You eat something really good and you kind of have a new level of energy. Nancy? His energy was renewed, is what yours said.
And I'm just thinking,
that's exactly right. So that's a great observation. Jonathan did not know about this oath. Now the question is, does that matter or not?
well, he was exhausted from helping his father
Right.
in this battle.
Right.
And so then he's defensive when they say, hey, your mother, he said, well, worn out, we've just been in battle.
Yeah.
And yet look how it renewed me.
Yes. Yeah, his criticism seems to be justified, but we're moving into interpretation, so I'm going to stop us there. Yeah, but we'll come back to that. What else are you guys noticing? Okay. Yeah, so let's actually break that part of the story down. First, what he does is he says, let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them till dawn. Let's not leave anyone alive. They replied, do whatever seems best to you. But the priest says, of course, this is my interpretation. Hang on a minute. Let's ask what the Lord wants first. So they ask what the Lord wants, and he's silent. And that seems to be a moment where Saul is realizing something's wrong. Now the observation question is, why is that the thing that makes him think something's wrong? Does the Lord always speak? Is it what's going on in this moment that makes them go, something's wrong? And so he ends up asking the people, okay, what's the sin that's out there that somebody knows about that we need to get figured out because the Lord's not responding to us? And I don't care what it is. I don't care how bad it is, even if it's my own son. And is he speaking in hyperbole there? Is he just saying that to make himself look like, even if it's my own issue, but thinking it would never be Jonathan kind of thing? Now, then, I guess that's where we stopped. Any other observations that you guys are making here? You might move us into interpretation. Go ahead.
It seems strange that Saul making the troops swear to an oath that he made.
Yes.
Something that Lord had told him.
Okay. Yeah, so you're just noticing that this seems to be an oath that Saul has made. He's not been told by the Lord to make this oath. And you're very right about that. So let's just start with this. What is we live in an individualistic world for the most part. Of course, we have community. We're in one right now. But even in the community we live in, we still have this thing like, you do what you want to do. Whatever seems best to you. We have some standards and rules and that kind of stuff, but we are not really what we would see as a communal society. In a more communal society, typically there are honor-shame cultures. So whatever you do either brings honor or shame to the community that you're part of, primarily your family, but the larger community as well. But you also have a patriarch. And the king is seen as the key patriarch. He is the patriarch of all patriarchs. And the patriarch has a lot of roles. One of those is setting the standards for the people that in their house. If the king wants to make an oath because, for whatever reason they want to make the oath, if the king makes an oath, everyone is bound by the oath. Now we in our world would say, you don't own me, and we would say, we're not going to participate in that. But when the king does it in a patriarchal society, in a monarchy, you do what the king says. You're all bound by the oath. The question is, why would he do it? That's my biggest question. Why in the world would he do this? And I read a really helpful line here from this commentary that I wanted to share with you guys tonight. First it says, this shows what he believed to have been true, what the author believed to have been true about Saul, that he was rash and presumptuous in his relationship to Yahweh, and he tried to manipulate the divine will through ritual formality. It's the similar conversation we had when we were dealing with the ark, and the ark moving to and fro, to be used as a tool by God, this divine manipulation. This is the lucky rabbit's foot. And if we take it wherever we go, then the Lord will be there and show up and He'll protect us, whether He said to do it or not. And that's a misunderstanding, isn't it? That led to it being taken by the Philistines and it's almost like God saying, you're not in control of the ark. I am the ark, you know. And it's a similar thing that's happening here. It's another moment where Saul is saying, I'm going to use God, not necessarily asking him to lead me. I'm just going to rashly, presumptuously do what I think is best. Now, here's what I would say in defense of Saul. I don't think Saul is power hungry here. That's not the way that this is described to us. This doesn't seem to be Saul trying to gain as much power as he can for himself and willing to risk the lives of everybody else. This seems to me to be Saul haphazardly trying to lead the people without the wisdom of God because it's already kind of been removed. You remember what happened? He's there. Samuel says, wait until I get there to do the sacrifices. And Saul's like, we got to get this taken care of now, guys. It's been 7 days and he's not here. I'm going to make all these sacrifices. And in that moment, Samuel says, you're no longer the king. I mean, it's over for you. When we try to move forward without the power of God, doing the things of God, that's not a good recipe. And that's where that's where Saul is in this moment. And what he's done now, as Jonathan has declared, is he's put a burden on his own people, thinking he's actually helping them. If I make this oath for everyone, the Lord will do this for us, and it will be great for everyone. But in the end, he's actually risking his own men's lives. And Jonathan just names that. How ridiculous is this? You know, they're exhausted. Wouldn't it have been better to let them eat? Then the final piece of this, not only are we going to have to deal with the risk that is now Jonathan's own life because he broke the covenant, but it's at the point where the men are so hungry that after they defeat the Philistines, they're not even thinking about righteousness or holiness. There is a law that says the Jewish people in their diet should not eat meat with blood in it. And that doesn't mean raw meat. It means the blood has to be drained from the animal as it's been field dressed. I point over here because I was just talking. I was just talking with Doc over here about the deer that he got this last week. You drain the blood. Of course, there's a little bit of blood that stays in it, but you drain the blood, and that's how you cook the meat. They're not even waiting. They're slicing this thing open, and they're getting this meat off as fast as possible because they are starving. And that's where Saul says, okay, this isn't a sacrifice altar. He's actually just moving a stone over. This is not a sacrifice. This is just needing to eat. And so the stone is the place where you can lay the animal so that you can so that the blood can be spilled out, and then you can eat the meat. But I think the picture that they're painting here is one of incredible hunger. Everyone brought his ox that night and slaughtered it there. It's going on all through the night. They're just that hungry. And there's that many of them. And the same words ring true as Jonathan says to him here. My father has made trouble for the country. Now, there's a lingering question that we haven't dealt with, and that is, why is it that Jonathan is bound by this oath when he didn't even know about it? You know, why would he be convicted of this if he didn't even know about it? And the reality is, they're a communal society. Somebody should have told him, but they didn't. And somebody probably should have stopped him when he was bringing the end of his stick up to his mouth, you know, but they didn't. And so he has to deal with the reality. My guess is that actually, if he didn't know about it necessarily in the moment, he was moving right. He really didn't care. He's there because he has done a lot of work and he's starving, and it brightens his eyes. Again, I love that language. I think it's really great language. Any other thoughts on this before we move forward? Yeah, Keith.
Mine is more of a question. In 38, Saul said,
Okay, so the NIV says, "Come here, all of you who are leaders of the army."
Okay.
What does yours say? Do you read from King James?
I do.
Okay, what does yours say?
And mine says all the chief of the people.
All the chief of the people. Okay.
So is that the leaders of the army?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be safe to interpret this as the leaders of the army.
Draws them in.
Yeah. Well, because so let's just think about the way that this is the army. They've been mustered out. They're out in battle, and they're the leaders of the army. So you break it down into all of the different sections. They're the ones that should know everything. So he brings them together. Let's figure this thing out. As the chief of the army, himself, the king, and he says, even if it's my own son, kind of thing. Yeah. Again, as Bo mentioned, you're starting to sense the rashness just won't quit. Okay, let's pick up in verse 40. Saul then said to all the Israelites, "You stand over there. I and Jonathan, my son, will stand over here. Do what seems best to you," the men replied. Then Saul prayed to the Lord, the God of Israel, "Give me the right answer." And Jonathan and Saul were taken by lot, and the men were cleared. Saul said, "Cast the lots between me and Jonathan my son," and Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." So Jonathan told him, "I merely..." Okay, picture your own child saying this. And he's probably like this. I'm interpreting, okay? And he says, "I merely tasted a little honey with the end of my staff, and now I must die?" And Saul said, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you do not die, Jonathan." But the men said to Saul, "Should Jonathan die, he who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Never, as surely as the Lord lives, not a hair of his head will fall to the ground, for he did this today with God's help." So the men rescued Jonathan, and he was not put to death. Then Saul stopped pursuing the Philistines, and they withdrew to their own land. I'm going to stop there because the next section is a little different. What is it that you're noticing? Okay. Ah. Yes. So I have a footnote in verse 41 that in the Septuagint, that what you have in your Bible is in that those manuscripts that they found. "Why have you not answered your servant today? If the fault is in me or my son Jonathan, respond with the Urim, but if the men of Israel are at fault, respond with the Thummim." And so he's naming, okay, the Urim, if this is the thing that's thrown, then it's our fault. If it's not, it's this other thing, the Thummim. And so this is how you cast lots. Okay, Lord, if it's this number, then we know it's blah, blah, blah. So they're going to throw whatever it is if it's dice or if it's some other thing. And what we find is that it comes down to Jonathan and Saul are set aside, and then the two of them have to be set aside, and we find that Jonathan is guilty. Okay, what else are you noticing? Okay, his men talk him down. Not just talk him down, they seem to tell him, you can't do this, and they seem to be standing in between in a way. Yeah. Somebody else over here had their hand up. Ah, that's a great observation. Yeah, it doesn't give us Saul's reaction. Is he mad at them? Is he defeated? Yeah, we don't get any reaction. There also doesn't seem to be any political recourse for this either. It's sort of after this story, this is dropped. We move on to another story. Melanie?
Paul says, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely.
Yes.
And so I think that's going to be
For what?
I have over here.
Which title are you looking at? The beginning of 15. Oh, yeah. She's just saying she's wondering if this is foreshadowing, be it ever so severely. I'll tell you, it could potentially be foreshadowing, but I think the subtitle of chapter 15, The Lord Rejects Saul, has more to do with plenty of other things that Saul's done. Yeah. Mark? Yeah. Right. Yeah, I wonder if maybe a little bit in these questions that not only Mark you're asking, but Deanne's saying the same thing, this observation. I wonder if we could condense this to say, this seems like that was too easy. Is that kind of how it feels? It's like, you just said, you just said, like, may God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you do not die, John. Like, you just put your own son's life right out there and said, you're dying. And then all of a sudden it doesn't happen? Is it really that easy? It does feel a little bit trite, I guess. Yeah. Keith?
It almost seems like Saul has, as you read this, as we back up and then we read forward, that it's like he wants his son to be dead. It's almost like he's saying, you're going to die.
Yeah, so here's the observation question I have with that is, how angry is he really at Jonathan? And what's really going on in this? What could we at least guess is happening here with Saul that he's willing to not even try to protect his son? Yeah. Yes.
And then he broke the rule.
Yes.
Jonathan did go to die. Jonathan followed God.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. Melanie's just noting some of the things that Jonathan did to sort of stretch the limits with Saul. Although his disappearing didn't seem to be a negative thing necessarily. It wasn't a bad thing, but this honey thing is a pretty big deal. Somebody down here, Ruth. Ah, yes. Jonathan succeeded where Saul didn't. Now, give me a little bit of context in here of why you're saying that now.
Because he went out and he slave or whoever, and they went out.
Yes. Yes. So let's just make the observation that what is the thing that makes the men stand up and protect him? And their declaration is, he's the one that made this all happen. The actual phraseology there is, he who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel. I mean, think about that statement. He's the one that brought about the great deliverance from Israel. So I think there's a lot to that, Ruth. I want to put a pin in that and come back to it. All right, somebody in the back had their hand raised. Mark? Yeah, if you're reading ahead, you're going to see Jonathan, certainly, rebellion is not the right word, but critique is a heavy one for him. Yeah. Nancy? You have knowledge of what comes ahead. Yeah. Potentially. Right. So Nancy's just bringing up the question about, is Saul dealing with jealousy here? We do find out later in the story that he does have jealousy over Jonathan, but primarily his jealousy is over his relationship with David. That's what we'll find out later. But I do think that you're on the right track, which we're going to dig into here in a minute, is a little bit of what Ruth's talking about here. Whether it's jealousy or if it's humiliation, I do think there is some interpersonal relationship stuff happening here with Jonathan that is at play here. David?
I know this is not really an observation, but Saul is the first king. So as to the strength of his oath and his insistence, it could be he's still trying to establish.
Oh, yeah.
authority as
Yeah.
king.
Yeah, I think it's a good question to ask is what we see with Saul all along the way his desire to establish this kingdom, because it hasn't been established before. And this is a good jumping off point for interpretation, but I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. I mean, if you think about it in this way, not only because he's the first king, any king is going to struggle to have to establish their throne. When you jump into 1st and 2nd Kings, what you're going to find is when a new king comes in, they have to make the decision of how they're going to establish their king. Even Solomon himself is told by David, you're going to have to kill some people. This is going to show your power, and it's going to make things right. And so he does. And we find that same sort of recipe at play with all of the kings through 1st and 2nd, not all of them, but many of the kings in 1st and 2nd Kings. The idea of having to establish your kingdom isn't just, I'm a really good leader and I'm showing you I'm a good leader. It's, I am strong and I'm going to show you I'm strong. This is the peace of Rome, the Pax Romana. You'll have peace because I'm forcing you to have peace, Yes, Gary. Yes. Yes. What they saw, yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah, I think this is definitely growing pains of a monarchy. Absolutely. If you remember, those growing pains were there at the very beginning. Saul's there. Everyone says, yes, we'll pledge allegiance to you, except for a group of people over here. And they don't pledge allegiance to him till he's shown his might and strength by defeating the Amalekites. And so now, then that's when he gains the momentum there. But yes, growing pains are a big part of this. Now, in light of that, now let's paint a picture. You're standing there trying to lead the people forward, and you're trying to show your strength. And part of what you're doing, part of the way that spills out of you, because you don't have the trust of the Lord that we'll see in someone like David. Yes, you know that the Lord is necessary, but you've never really learned how to trust Him. And so you just use Him as a tool, whether it's the ark, or it's the ephod, or it's whatever, this oath. You declare these things with rashness because no one's ever done it before. You've never learned how to do it, and this is how you know how I'm just gonna do what feels best to me in the moment. And all of that ends up binding his own people and himself. And it continually gets him into trouble with the Lord, of course, with Samuel, and with his ability to keep being king. Yeah, I think you're right. I think God was the last resort for him. Which, to be fair, in our own current state of Christianity in America and in the world, we kind of act the same way, don't we? God often is the last resort. Yeah, Stephanie? Yes?
They made that never or he did this today with God.
Yes.
And Saul keeps saying, why would God
That's right. That's right. So let's paint the picture even further with that, because I think you're right. Now you're wanting to establish your role as king, and you keep making these rash mistakes, and then your son all of a sudden comes into the picture, and he leads a very successful campaign against an outpost of the Philistines that ends up throwing the whole Philistine army into a rage, or they just go crazy, and you get to defeat the whole army. But everyone knows it's your son Jonathan who did this. And now he has gone against you, gone against your oath. And he's done it in a very public way. Now we get to the point where he's standing there, and even more publicly has been this trial by lots. And Jonathan is clearly the one who has done it. And half the people know it. And you're still trying to establish your kingdom. So what do you say? You're dead. You have to die. You have brought shame to me. Your actions have brought shame to your family. Because I set a standard and a rule, an oath, and everyone was supposed to keep it. And now my own flesh and blood has done this. And in essence, what he's saying is, you're dead to me. Because you betrayed me. So in other stories throughout the Bible, what this happens is the patriarch disowns the one who has done this. In this story, he says, you're dead to me. So far be it from me if I don't kill you. The Lord can do whatever, he's dead. And he's so serious about it that the men of the army are concerned. This man who has been a leader of our army, who actually led the rout here, is going to die. We're going to stand up. This is, in essence, a type of coup that's just happened. But it's just so softly stated. They're so overwhelmingly in favor of Jonathan living that it happens so quickly they don't even tell us what Saul's reaction is. That's my interpretation of why we don't see it. This is so overwhelmingly in Jonathan's favor that Saul doesn't even have a choice. He knows if he kills Jonathan, he loses his army. And so he just says, okay, and we move on. It's fascinating. What we'll watch, though, is that, Saul, it's not all lost with him, but the reality is his family is broken, his relationship with Jonathan is broken, and his kingdom is broken. And so right now, we will continue to watch what we would consider a lame duck king. Now, he doesn't act that way necessarily, but his power is that way. So we have 5 minutes. I just want to read this last section, and then we'll move in there to go eat. After Saul had assumed rule over Israel, he fought against their enemies on every side: Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment on them. He fought valiantly and defeated the Amalekites, delivering Israel from the hands of those who had plundered them. This is really a quick summary. Now, Saul is not going to die for a long time. I mean, you're talking way deep in here. I should have looked this up before. He is still, he didn't die till the very end in chapter 31. But when you read that description, it sounds exactly like they described the kings in 1st and 2nd Kings. Josiah reigned for 20 years, and he did this, and this, and now he sleeps with the fathers. It's that's the summarizing statement. And Saul's summarizing statement is right here in chapter 14. And he won't die until chapter 31. Clearly, the author knows the story, and is making a statement. His days are numbered. And what we'll find in next week in chapter 15 is that he's rejected as king once again. We're just having the same story kind of being churned over and over. Saul is rejected as king. And it's because of his own rashness, his inability to trust God, and he's lost his people. They don't trust him. As this builds, we're going to watch Saul's rashness grow even more. In fact, he becomes what you could be considered mentally ill, and we're going to find a lot of this just plays out in his life. And so, what kind of comments do you guys have or thoughts before we close up? Yes. You're talking about at the end of the section we read, or in the middle of it? You're saying it went there in verse 36, 35? Yeah, mine says it was the first time he had done this. Yes. Yeah. Oh, yours says, and I am ready to die. Does anybody else say that in 43b? I am ready to die? Interesting. I'd have to look at that because the NIV says, and now I must die, is a question like, seriously, this is what you're going to make me do, you know? Oh, obviously. That's the English translation that's absolutely correct. Yes. Okay, you sound like somebody who believes the King James Version is the only correct. Even Jesus read the King James Version, I've heard. Yeah, Joyce, yeah.
My Bible says, and now I'm supposed to die.
And now I'm supposed to die. With a question mark? With a question mark, yeah. And if it was 2021 or 2024 version, it would be exclamation mark and question mark. Yes, Bo, you get the final word. I think at this point he's in his 30s or 40s. Jonathan would probably be in his 20s. Late teens. David is not a part of Jonathan's life at this moment. Jonathan and Saul? Good question. I don't have an answer to that, but I think that's a really good question. How are they so different? That you're asking a psychological question. Yeah, you are. Yeah. Okay, tonight is the perfect night for stew. We have that over there and some strawberry cake. And if you're interested in the England meeting, try to get in line first and meet us in Brogden. Let me pray for us. Holy Spirit, we are thankful for your word, and we don't want it to just come in to our brains and leave. We don't want it to be there void. We want it to mean something. So would you give us eyes to see what it means for us today? And let it linger in us. And we pray this in your holy name. Amen.